In the introduction to my book, This England in Raymond Chandler, I said that I have been a collector and student of Raymond Chandler for more than 40 years. Well, now that I count, nearer 50. That comment has prompted several light-hearted conversations in my bookshop, as I have swapped yarns with different collectors, so I thought there might be some interest in my posting a similar chat here. Please, I'm not going to list my collection. Like family historians, collectors tend to be interested in their own collection, but quickly bored by the intricate details of another. Rather, I would like to share with you some of the adventures along the way. The High Window was the first Chandler book that I read. I was 17 and waiting in a car park while my girlfriend chose some underwear in a nearby branch of Dorothy Perkins. I was an immediate fan. Of the book or the underwear, you must decide. I was drawn to Chandler's use of English, his descriptions, and the attention he gave to the minor characters in the story. Generally, The High Window is considered to be one of his weaker books, although Philip Durham, in his biography Down These Mean Streets a Man Must Go, takes a different view. And I soon realised that I preferred the short stories to the novels. For those of you who haven't read Chandler, I should point out that these stories are usually about 40 pages in length, a strange length I've always thought, a little cumbersome even. But it is here that Chandler gives us his best storytelling. I would offer Red Wind and The Lady in the Lake as the pick of the bunch. Now, in those early days, I wasn't sure how much Chandler had written, so I set about gathering, rather than collecting, anything that I could find. Duplicated titles were not too much of a problem, because the various editions usually came with interesting artwork. However, this gathering continued until my wife pointed out that buying a further copy, only because the cover price on the back was 3 6 instead of 3 shillings, signalled that the Hoover 'em up approach had developed into an obsession. A collection with some sort of form or purpose might be better. That is not to say that the boundaries of a collection aren't elastic, although I have found that other people are as responsible for recasting the rules as I have been. You see, my family and friends view my collecting as the solution to their present buying problems at Christmases and birthdays. Never quite confident enough to invest blindly in a book, the present buyers come at it sideways. And this is always delightfully pleasing, for I have been given treats that I may never have considered buying myself. So my collection of books by Raymond Chandler now includes board games of the characters, packs of cards, die-cast models, a map of Los Angeles printed in the 1930s, and well, so on. I was especially pleased with a figurine of Bogey as Marlowe. A Father's Day present, he stands 10 inches tall, guarding my run of English first editions. I do have a sneaking feeling that Bogey is portraying Rick in Casablanca rather than Marlowe in The Big Sleep, but I don't have to acknowledge that if I don't want to. Less reputable is the Girly magazine with a cover girl called Phyllis Marlowe. She's not on the shelf, but elsewhere, and of course in a plain brown paper wrapper. The die-cast models are something of a problem. I'm not a collector of toy cars, but when one of my bookshop customers found me a model of Marlowe's Oldsmobile, I wondered if I should collect a similar example of each of his cars. They are, very usefully, listed in Edward Thorp's book Chandlertown. But I have always thought that they would need to be in the same scale and produced by the same manufacturer during the Chandler era, in real time if you like. Otherwise they would not make a reasonable collection. So one avenue is left unadopted. The cut and thrust is one engaging fun of collecting. One day I was wandering around our local auction house. This would be 20 years ago. I had already identified one stray Chandler in a box of other books and was busy not drawing attention to it, when I noticed another viewer take the book from its box and tuck it down the side of a different box. Of course, anyone purchasing the original box would have little cause for complaint when he got home, unpacked and found that it wasn't there. He had bid on a box of books and was delivered a box of books. But my competitor's antics seemed hardly fair. Come auction day, he was puzzled when I competed earnestly for what should have been the second and next to worthless lot. I am afraid I didn't win the auction, but I made sure that the other fellow paid well for it. But generally other collectors are gems to meet and chat with. Bob Adey, no longer with us unfortunately, but one of the truly great collectors of the genre in England, was always generous with his tips and knowledge. I never got to see his collection, but just hearing about it was pleasure enough. He was more of an enthusiast than I was, but always quieter with it, and I felt privileged when the bibliographer, Matthew Broccoli, phoned one evening to order a book from one of our mail order catalogues. It was one thing to have found an edition that he hadn't heard of. It was another to know that one of our books would find its way into his collection, but best of all was chatting to him, even if I didn't convince him to produce a revised edition of his bibliography. And talking of people, I must mention that while Chandler's grave is too far away to visit, being on this side of the Atlantic has brought one compensation. For me, the best Philip Marlowe was not Bogey, or Garner, Eliot, Philip Carey, or any of the others, but Ed Bishop, who starred in the BBC radio adaptations of the 1970s, and he is buried not far from our home. The best story, of course, is always the one that got away. And here, though it pains me, I need to tell you of a visit to Stratford-upon-Avon when I found a first edition of The Little Sister. It wasn't an attractive copy. She had lost her dust wrapper, and her cloth spine had faded. But stuck to one corner of the front paste-down end paper was a small bookplate telling the tale that she had once been the property of J.B. Priestley. Priestley, who had met Chandler, who was mentioned in Chandler's letters, and whose review of The Little Sister in New Statesman did much to progress Chandler's reputation in this country. She should have merited a place on any collector's shelf, but these were the early years of my marriage. Pocket money was especially limited, and in all conscience, contemporary conscience that is, £4 seemed a lot of money to spend on one book. Now collectors will tell you that the pleasure of book collecting is the serendipity of it. But one lucky find is always enough to convince us that any town is a good place for books, when we mean was a good place for books once and for one book. And it is worse when we know that the one that got away slipped into these waters. I lost Priestley's Little Sister in the late 1970s, but I can't help myself. Whenever I visit Stratford, I always look into every corner of the town, just in case. So there we are. Some of the fun of Chandler collecting in 1,300 words. Good night, and God bless.
The world of Malcolm Noble's crime fiction.